So I think that the topic, at least for the moment, we'll talk a little bit about relapse, slips, relapses, and recovery.
Is that with emotions or just substances?
That's a great question. So is that just emotions or substances? When I speak about relapse, I speak about relapse to previous patterns of being that were not serving us, which can involve all of the above. So it can be substances, it can be behaviors, it can be drugs. What is a relapse really? And what is recovery really? Do you lose recovery when you relapse? Do you what are some of these issues? And I think this is a good topic that we'll just dive into. So I think that's a good place to start. So relapse. If you define relapse too narrow, if you define relapse as too narrow, what that means is I drank for 1 week, that's a relapse. Anything else is not a big deal. Or if you define relapse as just like a chronic way to just say you're a bad person, it neither achieves, I think, the what we want to do in recovery. So I like to use relapse to previous patterns of being. And this is actually unique. Every one person's pattern of relapse is different. There's a concept. I was reading a book on coaching the other day, and there was an athlete who said, I'm going to be a gold medalist in the next Olympics. 4 years, and his personal best was a swimmer, I think, and he was 5 seconds off of the world record, and that's a lot of time. That's not a little bit of time. So he's in his mind, he set a goal. The end goal was, I want to be a gold medalist at the Olympics. And then he set performance goals in between. And then what he did was he calculated, okay, for every hour of training, how much faster do I have to get to my destination? And the answer was for every hour he trained, he had to improve his time by a blink of the eye. So that's about 0.1 seconds or something like that. So very, very little goal. And then that's what he did. And then he got his medal. He improved his time, little bit, and he got to the goal. When we define success for ourselves, or when we define disease for ourselves, you achieve everything by defining what your goal is without a definition. So if I just said, I want to be a gold medalist at the next Olympics, I'm going to work really hard. Work really hard to do what? You can't just work hard. You need to add definition. You need to add goals. You need to add parameters. You need to give structure so that you can achieve. What's the difference between a little bit, like if I take a spark and I just like a match, and I light a match right here, it doesn't really do anything, it goes out. But if I take the same amount of energy and I put it in a long barrel next to a bullet, and I light a match, that same little bit of energy will suddenly change everything, or could change everything. There's more direction to it. A human has potential, but if you just take that energy and you just like heat it up, a little bit of flame in the middle of it doesn't do anything. It's not good for much, it's like, we have lights, so it's not really good for lighting anything up. A little match won't stay lit for very long. But if I constrain it, if I say, okay, I'm not going to light a match anywhere, I'm going to light a match right next to a oil lamp, like one of those jots. You light a match, and then all of a sudden that energy, same amount of energy, is good for something. It is lighting a lamp for a couple of hours. If it's that same amount of energy, you use it to build a fire, and you use it to burn you know how you start a fire, right? Little twigs. It's the same amount of energy. But the problem of addiction and mental health is really as simple as wasting your energy. You waste your energy when you do not define your goals. So, you want to be sober. Sober from what? What does happiness mean to you? If you want to be sober, what does that mean? What are your bottom lines? I remember, I've met lots of people like this actually. He's a kind of a spiritual person. So I meet lots of people like this. This isn't just any one particular person's story. Spiritual kind of person, does a lot of meditating, was an alcoholic, but doesn't drink anymore, but he masturbates a lot. Like a lot. And the thing is that he's clearly got some kind of cross-addiction thing, but for him it's not a big deal. And yet he comes because he's not happy, he's depressed, he's anxious, he's this, he's that. He has not defined his recovery holistically. So, relapse to previous patterns of being that do not serve you is all about individualizing your disease process to you. So if you have addiction, what does that all mean? Everyone's different. You might have, let's say it's a person Bob. If he looks at his patterns of being, if he looks at why his marriage fell apart or why this or that didn't work out, if he's careful about his analysis, he might think, okay, so I'd say there was about, there was alcohol for sure, right? But then he thinks back and he's like, no, that wasn't all that was. I would never spend time with my wife because I'd always be masturbating. So I guess there was a masturbation aspect to it. And then he thinks a little bit more, and I guess I gamble too. I would play these lottery ticket things, and I would do it in such a way as to escape reality. It would just feel good. So I had a bit of gambling into it. And you know what? I can't stop checking my email. Add a little bit of internet addiction in there. Social media, right? Oh, and by the way, work 16 hours a day. So add a bit of workaholism. And so, what the mistake that most people make is they don't define their disease process. They say it's just one thing. It's never one thing. There's predilections. Women oftentimes will go to food, alcohol, that's all comers.
Shopping.
Women will oftentimes go to shopping and procurement type activities, body image type activities. Men will oftentimes go to sex, and masturbation does count as sex, and workaholism. Those are usually the common threads. And the thing is unless we are holistic about defining our recovery, what we do is we do the jump thing. We get this under control, check, and then this goes up. And then someone tells you that's no good. Check, you stop doing that, but then this goes up. And you go, okay, I'm not going to gamble anymore. Check. And then for some reason you go back to the alcohol. Or maybe you just start, instead of working 8 hours a day, you start working 16, because your real problem is you can't stand your wife. Or whatever, right? Like, this is the issue. If you don't holistically define recovery, and what is that? What is that definition? Because we're saying it's not about any one of these things. It's about the things you do to escape your reality. The things you do to numb out and change your existence so that it's tolerable. That you can not be bothered. These are the things that you do to alter your mental state so that it's okay, so that you're able to exist, so you can sleep. Whatever you do to get to sleep. Some people, they gotta masturbate before they sleep. It ain't good. Rather, I shouldn't say it's not good. Any kind of addictive coping will take you further away from your goal, which is to have a life you love, serenity, peace. When you have that, why would you want to change your reality? And the answer is you won't. When you have and you enjoy bliss, you enjoy being, there's no reason to change your reality.
Would you also agree that it could be the avoidance of self?
That's exactly what it is.
Because it's not just the wife, it's also the avoidance of self.
Spending.
Some people get married because they feel they have to. Some people get married because of that loneliness.
It is absolutely the thing about our lives is that they are all a projection of ourselves. We see and we get affected. So dyssynchrony or disharmony inside self will be reflected differently for different people. So some people, you close your eyes, ooh, it's really messy up there, so you don't close your eyes much. You don't like to spend much time alone because it hurts. Other people, They spend lots of time alone. They avoid people because they see themselves, so they stay alone. Everyone else is triggering. But then humans have a survival need to be with people.
So if that's the case,
Mhm.
when it comes to mental health diagnosing, how can we determine, when it comes to healthcare professionals who are making these diagnoses, like let's say even in the 70s, so if they're not looking at all those adverse childhood experiences that led to this self of behavior,
Mhm.
so how, I guess my concern is a lot of people are being diagnosed with things without looking at those traumas or the events or looking at, the self. Because Western medicine, and that is about just labeling people and then
And-
not changing that label when they've recovered.
And I think that it's a great question, right? Around, and we can come back to this later on today. Around diagnosis and
Because how
what
does that
we
fit in?
what
to
we
the
operate
diagnosis?
under, largely, especially at NOM, is what we call a treatment paradigm. Treatment paradigms are always different than diagnostic paradigms, because you got to diagnose people to have a common language to understand. But diagnosis, like many labels, are oftentimes inaccurate and shifting because the human is always changing.
Which in our healthcare system, it's not changing the label of.
And so I'm just gonna, we'll come back to this, but I'm gonna finish this topic, which is, if you wish to stop going from one thing to another, you can be addicted to good things too, eh? You can be addicted to exercise. You can be addicted to all sorts of stuff. Anything you do to escape can be used to define your red lines or the activity. So like a runner, how does a runner know that he or she is doing well? It is simply by the time. They have a clock. Okay, they have a personal best. And so if you spend time thinking what you do to run away from you and run away from life, and you write it down, then you can grade yourself every day. Which one of these things did I do? Or which one of these things, how active is it? That's part of what they call in AA an inventory, a daily inventory. And that's very important, to check yourself every day. Because this won't happen in an obvious way. It'll usually happen in a little bit. So when we say relapse to previous patterns of being, a slip versus a full-fledged relapse. So, someone who's been sober for 5 years, good, lots of deep recovery, deep things, but all of a sudden a craving happens, bad thing, bad stress, maybe some legal thing, right? And then you take a drink. Your inventory, you just took a drink. There wasn't anything else. You take a mental inventory of this idea. For example, relapse. There's 3 kinds of relapse. This is helpful. The physical relapse is the last stage. Before that comes the mental relapse. That is the fantasy. For example, if you're sober from pornography, or from sex, but you just spend time watching pornography, but you don't actually masturbate, that's not a physical relapse, but it's most certainly a mental relapse. You're spending time looking at that bottle, you're not drinking it. And there's lots of people like that, eh?
Yeah.
They put a bottle on the table, I'm not drinking you. And it stays there for weeks, for months, and they think it's a sign of their recovery. Absolutely not.
Yes.
It's a chronic state of mental relapse, which means at some level they're engaging with this behavior. And so, why do I care about that as a physician? Is because chances are all of the behaviors and emotional states and all the things that are actually making their life stressful, they're not going to be changing. I met a person a while ago, and he said something interesting. He was sober for a couple of years, I think, sometime. And he said that, Doc, I'm sober, but my wife, she tells me that I'm the same person. I haven't changed. I'm still a jerk. At least when I was drinking, I wasn't talking as much. That's what we call a dry drunk. As someone who is in a chronic state of physical, mental, or emotional relapse. And relapse always begins emotionally, then it goes into mental, and for some time, if you leave it unchecked, it goes to physical. It has to do that. If you're emotionally upset, you might not be thinking about any drug, but that circuit is going to be activated, and eventually it'll lead to a mental relapse, and eventually that will manifest in a physical relapse. So the issue, if you don't define your recovery holistically, if you don't define it in terms of all the things, what most people do is they're in a state of emotional relapse they think in relation to alcohol, but they've already started to gamble. They've already started to workahol. They've already increased their consumption of masturbation. So they're coping, and what that means is in the brain, this is the brain stem, like a cross-sectional image. If this is the alcohol center, right here, the porn center is kind of, it's right here. The gambling center is kind of like overlapping with the addictions, with the alcohol center. The internet is right here. So the thing is that you can't really activate one without activating the others, which is why you switch. So you might say to me, Dr. Gill, alcohol is the only thing that's making my life unmanageable. I just want to stop that. I want to keep the rest. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You got a problem there, which means you got a problem with that big circle. Any nerves close to that, if they're active, they're likely going to activate that too, right? It's like, I want a fire here, but I don't want one here. And they're connected with all the same wood. It doesn't work. The fire spreads. That's what fires do, they spread. So neuronal activation spreads, which is why you want to really know this about yourself. Because if you don't, you're going to be that guy or that lady. What? How could I relapse after 20 years? What? I didn't see it coming. Yeah, you didn't see it coming because it was there all along. You were in a chronic state of emotional relapse. You were coping with A, B, and C. And once you get into mental relapse, it goes very quick. Before you know it. Which is why you don't want alcohol sitting next to your bedstand. Because yeah, you won't drink until you're in a state of emotional upset, and all of a sudden it will just seem like the only option for you. So relapse to previous patterns of being means this idea of relapsing. How far back to old ways do you go? That's what is the difference between a slip, where you've only drank, but you've maintained your recovery. It was a very strong craving. Cravings are neurobiological, and it just happened. And you get back on track quickly, and you're not defensive. You're back into your recovery. You're doubling down into it. You're doing step work, whatever. That's a slip. Versus a relapse will usually have a bunch of these things that you've been doing all along, and then you get into the alcohol, and it's hard to recover quickly from that. That's a relapse. And sometimes we don't know what it is. But you should know what you are. Define your recovery in terms of you. Don't define it in terms of Buddy, Bob, or... No one talks about sex, so let's be honest. And inside most places in society, they don't talk about the things we do to cope. As a result, it's hard to get honest conversation about it. So you need a recovery community. This is a great activity to do with your own, with people that you're in recovery with. And the more definition you give, you're like that athlete. The more information you have, the better you can perform. Performance is very much related to awareness of how you're doing. You can't be aware of how you're doing unless you know the full extent of what you're doing. And that, I think, is an excellent place to stop.